They sold my car, my own husband and his family. No warning, no explanation, just gone. I came back from a failed job interview and the driveway was empty. When I asked, Jason smiled and said, "We used the money for something more useful. Family priorities." I stood there, holding my resume folder, shaking. That car was the last thing I still owned in my name, the last piece of me they hadn't touched. That night, I didn't scream. I opened my laptop, clicked a folder named Backdoor, and typed a name I hadn't touched in years. This wasn't over. I moved into Jason's family home out of necessity, not choice. After the collapse of Aldridge Financial, where I worked for nearly a decade, I became public collateral damage in a money laundering scandal I had no part in. My name wasn't in the news, but inside the industry, it was radioactive. We said it would be temporary, a few months, just until I got back on my feet. Jason said his parents welcomed me, but welcome wears thin fast when you're living on borrowed grace. At first, everything looked normal, pleasant even. Dinners were civilized. His mother always asked if I needed more potatoes. His sister dropped fake compliments about my resilience. But beneath the politeness was pity. Every word dripped with unspoken judgment, like I'd lost something that made me respectable. The only thing still mine was my car, a white Tesla Model Y. I'd saved for it for 3 years, bought it outright. Sleek, efficient, and quiet, it was the last proof that I had once been someone who moved forward on her own terms. I used it to interview, scout freelance gigs, escape when the walls of this house closed in. It was my freedom disguised as a vehicle. Then, last Thursday, I returned from an all-day interview in Westlake. The driveway was empty. I thought Jason had taken it to the office, or maybe his sister borrowed it again without asking. But as I stepped inside, sweaty and drained, I noticed Jason on the couch, scrolling his phone like nothing had shifted. "Where's my car?" I asked. He looked up with a smile that made my stomach turn. "Oh, right, we sold it." I blinked. "We?" He shrugged. "We needed the money, Sam. Family priorities. It wasn't being used for anything important." My mouth went dry. "Jason, that car is registered under my name." "Was," he corrected. "You weren't using it enough. I talked to Dad and Karen. We all agreed it made more sense to liquidate it now. It got a good price." There was no confrontation, no discussion. My voice trembled as I asked if he had any idea what he'd just done. He stood. "Relax. The money's going toward things we all use, a shared benefit." I didn't sleep that night. I laid in the guest room staring at the ceiling, replaying his words. Shared benefit. They saw me as part of a collective I never agreed to join, a body with no boundaries. The next morning, I waited until the house was quiet. Then I went to the garage where the security DVR was stored. I pulled the footage from the past week. I watched Jason walk into the garage with Karen, his sister, and open my glove compartment for the title. But what froze my blood wasn't that they took the car. It was seeing my digital signature appear on the bill of sale. My name, Samantha E. Keller, matching the bank documents, time-stamped, authenticated by voice. Perfectly legal, except I never signed anything. I clicked the audio clip tied to the file. A voice, my voice, said, "I authorize the sale of the vehicle under my name." It was flawless. My inflection, my rhythm, even the slight break I get when I'm anxious. But I never said those words, not into any recorder, not to anyone. That night at dinner, I brought it up. "Jason, I checked the bill of sale," I said calmly. "It has my signature and my voice authorization." He didn't flinch. "Yeah? We used the voice file from that voicemail you left me 2 months ago." "You deep-faked me?" Jason shrugged, his mother sipping wine next to him like it was just another Wednesday. "It's not a big deal. We figured you'd be okay with it. You weren't using the car." "No one thought to ask me?" his sister chimed in. "Honestly, Sam, you're acting like we robbed a bank. We needed the car. You weren't pulling income." My chest tightened. I felt the world split into something unfamiliar, where autonomy didn't belong to the unemployed. Jason leaned forward. Please don't make this dramatic. We're still family. Let's not turn this into something ugly. I stood, slowly, carefully, and I said nothing. That night, after they all went to sleep, I opened my laptop. As it powered on, a new message blinked across the screen, a private file transfer from an anonymous email. Inside it was a scanned copy of the vehicle sale contract. At the bottom, in tiny gray letters, almost invisible, was a line I hadn't seen before. This authorization was processed via third-party system under license reference, K-Proof B21.0. Full traceability logged. The message below it read, "If you want everything back, start with that reference code. I'll be in touch." I didn't confront them again. Not yet. Not when I had nothing but righteous anger and a soft voice no one in that house cared to hear. Instead, I pulled back, mentally, emotionally. I stopped reacting. Let them think they'd won. I smiled more, nodded when spoken to, played the agreeable wife, while quietly weaponizing my silence. The first call I made was to a contact I hadn't spoken to in 4 years, Jennifer Lee, a quiet but sharp securities lawyer I once helped avoid a minor compliance scandal. I sent her everything, copies of the contract, video stills from the garage, the metadata from the sale file. 3 days later, she called me back. "Sam, that contract's dirty. Blockchain inconsistencies. It was tampered with. Whoever sold that car used an overlay ledger. You didn't sign anything. They replicated your ID through a third-party bypass protocol. And it's traceable? Barely, but yes, with the right code, we can track it to the executing server. K-Proof B21.0. I stared at those characters like they were coordinates to a war I was just now understanding. That same week, I began auditing myself, quietly, ruthlessly. I found old flash drives, reopened dormant accounts, sorted through encrypted folders I hadn't touched since my audit days. Deep in an archived subfolder titled Alt Projects, I found an invite to a private server, the same server I had been invited to years ago by a woman known only as Kepler, a name whispered in private circles, part urban legend, part fintech prodigy, allegedly bankrupted 2 hedge funds before she was 29. I clicked. "Welcome back," the screen read. A chat window opened. "Voice only," it pinged. Then an audio clip played, distorted, female, robotic. "You've lost control. Good. That means you're ready to learn how systems truly work." The sessions began the next day. Audio only, asynchronous. Lessons in black box algorithms, market manipulation detection, financial surveillance. I was absorbing it all like oxygen after drowning. I learned how trades trigger across networks milliseconds before news breaks, how certain hedge funds use purchase patterns to predict political unrest. But more than that, I learned how to trace flow, not just money, but power. Kepler didn't teach. She provoked. "Why did they take the car?" she asked in one recording. "Because they knew it was the last thing you thought they wouldn't touch. That's not theft. That's psychological decapitation." 48 hours after integrating the predictive engine Kepler gave me into a sandbox brokerage account, I flipped $2,000 into $1,600 by exploiting a commodity market inefficiency. I didn't tell anyone, not even Jennifer. I just watched the money move, watched it obey. Next, I formed a company, not under my name, not even in my state. I used a registered agent in Delaware, built a clean front, borrowed the name of a distant cousin who owed me a favor. The LLC's stated purpose was data consultation. In reality, it was a high-frequency microanalysis engine wrapped in front-end consulting. I called it K-Vector. Through Kepler's network, I gained entry into a backdoor brokerage pipeline. I tested theories, manipulated data patterns, then began publishing anonymized predictions through encrypted newsletters under the alias L. Martin. And they listened. Analysts, traders. People who once wouldn't give me the time of day were now quoting L. Martin in private chats. The engine worked. I was back in the game, only this time, no one knew my face. Weeks later, Kepler sent me another file titled Case 22 Internal. It contained logs, meeting minutes, and flagged emails. My heart stopped. Jason had filed the whistleblower report that destroyed Aldridge. Not because it was true, but because he found evidence of minor discrepancies, inflated them, and sold the story to regulators before compliance teams could act. He'd leveraged his proximity to me. He made it look like I was the source of corruption. Then he negotiated a side deal with Aldridge's competitor to get a business development role. My husband had orchestrated the downfall of my career, so I'd have nowhere else to go but into his family's control. That night, I opened K-Vector's dashboard and made a single trade. I bought 12% of his new company through a shell investment fund, Veria Capital. It wasn't illegal, just hidden. By the time it cleared, my name was nowhere near the transaction. But Jason's world had just become 12% mine. The first rule of building an empire is not announcing it. So I didn't. I simply seeded it in silence. Through K-Vector, I hired a consultant named Andrea Coles, a former analyst from San Diego with a pristine resume and no ties to me. On paper, she was brought in as a compliance advisor for Jason's firm, recommended through a third-party vetting service that didn't exist 6 months ago. In reality, Andrea answered only to me. Her job was to listen, document, and report. She integrated fast. Within weeks, Andrea was sitting in executive huddles, gaining access to Slack channels, overhearing Jason's side conversations. She began feeding me raw data, projected valuations, internal debates over crypto-backed assets, questionable gifts from offshore accounts. It wasn't enough to strike yet, but the web was tightening. One night, unable to sleep, I checked an auction site for used electric vehicles. There it was. A white Tesla Model Y, listed under a third-party dealer with the right VIN and the same small dent I remembered on the back bumper. It had resurfaced like a ghost. I drove to the address listed, late, alone. A garage tucked behind a used tire warehouse in Glendale. The car was parked by the back wall, dusty but intact. I stared at it like a corpse I hadn't buried properly. The man watching the place barely glanced at me when I told him I was a potential buyer. "Just browsing," I said, my voice calm. While he went to fetch paperwork, I slipped a tracker into the wheel well. Not standard GPS. It was built into a shell of an old brake sensor and triggered only when the car moved. It would feed me data silently, discreetly, like a loyal dog sniffing trails I couldn't see. 2 days later, the tracker pinged. The Tesla had been moved to a property owned by a subsidiary of a digital currency firm, registered under Karen's name, Jason's sister. The sale hadn't been about liquidity. It had been about laundering something bigger. I dug deeper. The company, Onyx Mobility, had received several consulting fees from Jason's firm over the past year. The car sale was a camouflage, a way to scrub a portion of those funds clean through a private, unregulated asset. The car was the entry point. Now I had a trail. I started releasing data. Not to the public, too early for that, but to a curated list of financial journalists, investigators, and one very specific contact inside the Financial Conduct Oversight Board. Anonymous packets, carefully edited leaks, enough to raise eyebrows without revealing myself. Meanwhile, Andrea told me about a senior accountant at Jason's firm, Eric Paulson. That name landed with a strange weight. I remembered Eric. He had been an intern at Aldridge under my supervision 5 years ago. Shy, obsessive with detail, the kind who double-checked formulas out of habit. "He doesn't like what he's seeing," Andrea said during one voice call. "He's asked twice if the crypto disbursements align with internal compliance. I think he's on the fence." "Give him a reason to jump," I replied. We sent Eric anonymized files, old reconciliations, misaligned ledgers, just enough to nudge his conscience awake. It didn't take long. He messaged Andrea 2 days later asking, off the record, if she'd ever heard of a whistleblower protocol. I smiled when she told me. The next board meeting was held in a luxury hotel downtown. Jason had no idea I was there. I wore a navy sheath dress, hair pinned tight, glasses I didn't need but wore like armor. I sat in the VIP section behind a curtain of silent investors. When Jason took the stage, he looked confident, unaware the floor beneath him was cracking. Andrea took her seat at the staff table. Eric sat 2 rows behind me, a man with shaking hands holding secrets too large to bear. Jason began presenting their Q4 numbers: projected growth, offshore expansion, strategic alliances. He used words like disruption and adaptive velocity, like performance drugs. The room nodded, robotic. Then the chairman opened the floor for final comments. A voice interrupted. "We have an urgent motion to review minority voting shares." Jason froze. He turned to look toward the investor wing, and his eyes passed right over me. I didn't blink. The chairman continued. "There has been a shift in ownership percentages. Varia Capital has submitted a special request to activate emergency voting rights under Clause 17.3. Jason's face drained. He knew Varia. He'd approved one of their buy-ins, a small player, barely present, until now. He looked out again, scanning. Then he saw me, and for the first time in our entire marriage, he realized I had been playing a different game. Resurrection doesn't always look like rising from ashes. Sometimes it looks like a sleek interface, white-labeled and humming with code I wrote by hand. It looks like a landing page with no face, just the words, "Regain control, own your money, rewrite your story." That was the tagline for her ledger, a financial autonomy app designed for women trapped in economic dependency. It offered AI-generated audits, risk alerts for financial abuse, and auto-mapping of hidden assets. Quiet, clean, precise, just like I needed to be. I launched it under the identity, L. Martin, and pushed it through a group of underground forums and financial support groups for women. In the first 48 hours, 300 downloads. By the end of the week, 7,000. Then one post went viral. A woman in Texas, divorced, 2 kids, drowning in credit card debt, used her ledger to uncover a pattern in her husband's shadow accounts. She proved he'd been funneling money to a mistress and hiding assets through a dummy LLC. She took that data to court. The judge ruled in her favor, reversed the debt, froze the accounts, and granted her full custody. Her story hit TikTok like wildfire. Her ledger justice trended for 3 days straight. I watched it all unfold from the silence of my apartment, sitting in a chair by the window with coffee in hand and a spreadsheet glowing beside me. For the first time in months, I exhaled. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was something bigger. That afternoon, I drove to a recording studio in downtown LA. I wore black jeans, aviators, and a white tee. Neutral, forgettable. But what wasn't forgettable was the car. A cherry red Ferrari 488 Spider. It had taken 4 days to ship in, 1 hour to register, and 7 seconds to make jaws drop when I stepped out. We filmed a short video. No face shown, just hands gripping the wheel. A voiceover, my own digitally softened, said, "They took my car, so I built a fleet." The camera panned out to reveal the Ferrari against the LA skyline. I dropped it on her ledger's page with a hashtag that bit harder than any headline. "The car you sold." The video crossed 2 million views in 12 hours. I didn't care about fame. I cared about the echo it created, the memory it reawakened. My phone buzzed with messages from women across the country, all saying the same thing. They did the same to me. And from that shared injustice, a quiet army formed. Meanwhile, inside the walls of Jason's world, the collapse had begun. Andrea had fed the last pieces to the Federal Financial Crimes Division. Quiet pings, ledger anomalies, names, transactions, emails, enough to light a fire under an agent with the right incentive. And that agent was very motivated. 2 weeks later, the FBI raided Jason's company. They froze accounts, hauled servers, interviewed executives. Eric Paulson, the quiet accountant, turned state witness under whistleblower protection. Andrea walked away clean. Her contract quietly ended just before the raid. Every move had been timed, every exit prepared. Jason called me at 3:42 a.m. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened a secure file Kepler had sent me earlier that evening, a video, archival footage from 15 years ago. My mother, much younger, sitting at a boardroom table. Across from her, Jason's father, Gerald. The footage showed her pleading, documents in hand, as Gerald waved her off, then signed a motion that forced her out of an investment deal that would have saved her company. That decision bankrupted her. It was never about bad luck. It was a calculated elimination. Kepler's voice came through in the background. He took her company. They took your mother's future. It's poetic, isn't it? You took theirs. The screen faded to black. It all made sense now. Kepler wasn't just a shadow mentor. She was my mother's best friend, once ruined by the same hands that now tried to control me. Her ledger wasn't just a tool. It was a reckoning, a full-circle storm. The next day, market reports announced Jason's company had lost 70% of its valuation overnight. Investors fled, clients walked. News anchors called it a catastrophic failure of leadership integrity. Jason wasn't arrested yet, but subpoenas were stacking. I walked past his office building at noon. He stood by the glass, talking to lawyers, eyes wild with disbelief. He didn't see me. I didn't need him to. I'd already made sure the whole world saw everything else. The first time I stood on stage, I wore a pale gray suit and heels that hurt by the second hour. The lights were blinding. The applause, artificial. 1,000 people in the audience, bankers, influencers, investors, all waiting to hear how I did it, how I turned betrayal into power, how I won. They called me a symbol, an icon of financial revenge, a feminist phoenix. I said the right words, told pieces of the story, sanitized for mass appeal. People clapped when I mentioned her ledger's viral success. They laughed when I described the red Ferrari. They gasped when I talked about the FBI raid like it was something out of a thriller. And when I walked off stage, someone handed me a check and someone else handed me a podcast contract. The invitations didn't stop. Panels, book deals, branding partnerships. A talk show, Ledger Line, launched with a curated aesthetic of empowerment. I sat across from guests who talked about divorce, inheritance battles, the trauma of financial gaslighting. We cried on camera. The internet applauded. But off camera, I began to feel hollow. Every green room felt colder, every stage more distant. The story I'd weaponized to take back my life had become content, and the more I told it, the less it belonged to me. It had been clipped, trimmed, packaged into sound bites. I was no longer a person. I was a cautionary tale turned commodity. I spent more time alone. The apartment I once cherished for its silence became oppressive. My mother, though proud, had moved to Maine to start a small business with friends from her recovery group. Jennifer had taken a long case overseas. Andrea disappeared cleanly after her role concluded. And Kepler, my mentor, my shadow, vanished like fog. Her messages stopped. Her encrypted line went dark. I assumed it was intentional. She never stayed anywhere long. Even Eric, the accountant turned whistleblower, had moved on. Last I heard, he was in Oregon teaching high school economics. I didn't blame any of them. They had lives to reclaim. I told myself I wanted the same. But when I sat in my office, surrounded by framed articles and trending dashboards, I realized something terrifying. I didn't know what I wanted anymore. The fire that drove me had burned so bright it incinerated everything around it. One night, after wrapping a podcast recording, I returned to my apartment to find a letter waiting on the kitchen island. No stamp, no envelope, just a folded sheet of paper, and beneath it, a sonogram photo. The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike. Sam, I know I don't deserve to ask anything from you. I know what we did was unforgivable, but I need you to understand. I didn't know everything Jason was doing. I believed him. Like we all did. I'm pregnant. I've been trying to get clean. This baby? It's not just a second chance for me. It's the only one I've got. I'm sorry. Karen. I stared at the ultrasound image for a long time. The shape was fuzzy, indistinct, but it was there. Proof of something new beginning in the wreckage I left behind. I didn't cry, I didn't forgive. But for the first time in months, I felt the edge of something I hadn't let myself touch. Regret. 2 weeks later, I opened an encrypted file marked Confidential Settlement Agreement, Jason Keller. He wasn't going to jail. Instead, he had signed a silence agreement, no admittance of guilt in exchange for turning over someone bigger, someone more dangerous. Kepler. He'd given them everything: server logs, code chains, audio files. He painted her as the mastermind, said she had used her ledger to create financial instability, manipulated market patterns to destroy his company. He framed her as a cyber activist gone rogue. The government had been waiting for a scapegoat, a faceless genius who operated outside regulation. Kepler fit perfectly. The next headline hit like a punch to the ribs. Anonymous AI architect accused in financial sabotage scheme. Source, spouse of key victim. Jason called himself a victim now. In interviews, he wept, said he'd been manipulated by a woman who exploited his trust, called her ledger an experiment that spiraled out of control. And the public? They weren't sure what to believe. I sat on the floor of my office, surrounded by silence, watching Kepler's name be dragged through networks she once owned, watching politicians use her as an excuse to push back against tech autonomy, watching the thing we built together turned into a weapon against itself. I had two options: fight or disappear. Fighting meant standing in front of cameras again, defending a woman who couldn't defend herself, reopening a wound that would never scar clean. It meant headlines, hearings, endless war. Disappearing meant surrendering everything we'd created: her ledger, K-vector, every algorithm and data set. It meant stepping out of the spotlight, not as a martyr, but as a ghost. I chose both. That night, I opened my private server and triggered the final protocol. It took exactly 12 minutes to wipe every AI investment model tied to K-vector. 12 years of financial insight gone in a cascade of deletion. I revoked her ledger's core engine, leaving behind a shell of educational tools. No predictions, no automations, just static, like an abandoned room where brilliance once lived. When it was done, I shut the laptop. No applause, no audience, just the sound of breathing. Mine. For the first time in a long time, it didn't echo back. The village was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that creaks with loneliness, but the kind that settles into your bones like warmth. It was built along a slow-moving river in northern Vermont, the kind of place where you could vanish without disappearing. I didn't use my real name here, just Lena, the woman who fixed laptops and helped local business owners digitize their ledgers. No one asked questions. That was the unspoken rule of this place. If you showed up broken, they let you stay anyway. I lived in a small cottage at the edge of the woods. No cameras, no press, no pinging notifications, screaming for attention. The Ferrari was long gone, traded for silence. In the mornings, I brewed coffee on a gas stove and walked down to the market, where I taught the grocer's teenage daughter how to manage online invoices. In the afternoons, I logged onto an old server through a VPN, where I answered anonymous messages from women who still needed help. They never knew who I was. They just knew someone answered. I gave them tools. Not flashy apps, not market engines, just spreadsheets, questions to ask their banks, phrases to use in court, templates to audit their own accounts. No algorithms, no exposure, no war, just information quietly passed hand to hand like matches in the dark. One night, a message came through the chat system. No subject line, just one sentence. "Thank you for helping me save my mom." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The next morning, I walked down to the library and checked on the old desktop I'd donated. I wiped the cache, ran the update, and as I rebooted it, something flickered across the screen. Her ledger. I blinked. I hadn't installed it here. I hadn't touched that code in months, but it was back. The interface had changed, simplified, streamlined. No predictive tools, no smart scanning. But the frame was unmistakable. At the bottom corner, a line of text pulsed softly, updated using AI pattern retention. History never forgets. I stared at it. The app had reassembled itself. Some part of the system, some shard of the original engine, had stayed alive in someone's device, learning passively from interactions, rebuilding from the fragments. And now, it was here again. Not under my control, not under anyone's, it was evolving. I left the library without touching it. That afternoon, I received a notification from a local paper in the city. Ferrari 488 Spider sold at charity auction for 1.3 cent. Proceeds fund, Financial Freedom Initiative for Women. The article listed no owner, no donor, just an anonymous contribution. But the buyers had flooded social media with pictures, photos of the Ferrari on the showroom floor, hashtags about freedom, rebirth. The plate still read, "Hurled." That was the final gift. The last vestige of my rage, polished and redirected towards something clean. I never said goodbye to it. I didn't have to. Some things say goodbye for you. Meanwhile, the world moved on. Jason was now a mid-level accounts manager at a real estate firm in Sacramento. He wore dull suits and carried reusable lunch bags and took meetings on Zoom where his name was always misspelled. He didn't speak publicly anymore. That privilege had been spent. And yet sometimes, the past still brushed up against him. He'd scroll social media and see a video of a woman testifying in court, citing anonymous tools that changed her life, or an infographic about gendered financial abuse, or a clip from a talk show guest quoting the phrase, "rewrite your story." The origins were blurry. The impact wasn't. Every time, it was me, without being me. That was the point. Because legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about being impossible to erase. One night, I stood outside my cottage as the first snow of the season began to fall. The river moved slowly in the distance, moonlight skating across its surface. I closed my eyes and breathed in the stillness. It didn't hurt anymore. Everything I had built, the war, the victories, the silence afterward, it had all settled into something deeper, something steadier. The revenge had faded, but the resonance stayed. My phone buzzed, a new message from a girl in Indiana, 16 years old. Her parents controlled every cent she made working 2 jobs. She wanted to open a secret account. She wanted to leave. I wrote back, "You're not alone. Start here." Attached was a document, simple, 5 steps, no AI, no code, just words. She replied 2 minutes later, "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would answer." I smiled, because that was the truth of it, wasn't it? You don't need to return to the past to prove your point. Sometimes all you have to do is exist beyond it.